don't have anything that is specific to this area of digital print, which is variable data printing, which also has some background in the PDF Association, and that is the reason why I thought, okay, maybe I have a talk on that here during the PDF days, because traditionally variable data printing is part of in-house printing. So it comes from invoice printing, customer communications. So these are terms that are related to variable data printing. And that is what I want to cover here. On the screen, we see an example for variable data printing. It is an official file, so nothing from a real customer, but representing something that could very well be used in reality. It represents something that is created by a travel agency, for instance, sending out a brochure to potential customers, potential travelers. And as you can see, each customer is different. So each customer may have different priorities when it comes to where to travel, and maybe related with adventures that are possible to make there in that destination, a different image. So as you can see, all of them are using the same pattern, using the same template, but are still individual. And that's all about variable data printing, which also means we are at 11:45, and that brings us in the middle of what I want to do with you right now. I have three major topics here, three things that work together, but that are quite distinct. So first, I want to give you more of an overview about what variable data printing actually is and why should you actually care. So if you are a designer, why should you care? And more importantly, if you are working in the PDF industry, why is this actually an interesting area? And that brings us to the next topic. What does variable data printing have to do with the internal PDF structure? So why is it important to think about PDF files when it comes to variable data printing, and in which ways? I'm a printing engineer, so I have lots of background from that industry. But I'm at the same time by now have some knowledge about PDF files, so I know what I'm talking about, and I'd really like to bring these things together in this presentation. And finally, I want to introduce you in two new publications. That was the other reason why I thought, okay, maybe we should cover this in the presentation here, two new publications of the PDF Association, best practice guides for variable data printing. And one of the goals of the presentation is to make you understand why is it good to have these guides. Yeah? Okay, first, where is variable data printing used? And we saw David's presentation, or most of you saw it, and he showed that printing is complex, and printing is not just what you may think of, that is the thing that is not in your daily letterbox anymore, maybe the newspaper or a brochure or something that used to be there 5 years ago, but in these days, at least my letterbox is usually empty when I open it. Most of the communication takes place digitally. So you may think, okay, who in the world is still printing and why is it important? And as David said, there are areas where print really is shrinking, where it's decreasing. The amount of paper that is being printed is definitely decreasing. On the other hand, the amount of PDF files that are being printed is increasing all the time, yeah, and that is because the circulation, the number of the same pages that are being printed is decreasing too. That means you need to have many more PDF pages in order to just create the same number of printed sheets. And these are a few examples for variable data printing, all of which have just one, more or less one printed copy of the same. Yeah? So there is direct mail, which in these days is one channel in omni-channel marketing. Omni-channel means you manage your customer communication and you use whatever channels you want to have that can use, newsletter, a website, whatsoever. And print is just one of the channels that you're using. And print, research says, print is the one that has the most credibility. Yeah, so and frequently used example, if you have a shop and then you have a shopping cart dropper, that means the shop is the shopping cart is still full, but he doesn't purchase. And then you would send him the very next day a printed letter giving him providing him with alternatives or maybe even a discount if we would finally buy what is in the shopping cart. Yeah, that is an example of omni-channel marketing. Or just highly individualized print products. For instance, the ones that I have here on screen. So something that is being sent out by a travel agency to their customers. Other examples are invoices. Yeah, you fully understand that each invoice will be hopefully individual. And then there is a special case. You could combine the invoice with some advertisement, which is called transpromo. And then there is label and packaging, things that are really evolving these days. So it's amongst our customers, the fastly growing area, and tickets. And here are a few more examples for labels, maybe labels, something like label. You have a label in the mid here at least, or tickets. So obviously things that need to be individual. So how can we print? I mean, in former times, print wasn't individual. So you were using commercial printing machine, and then you had to create a printing plate, and then you would print at least 1,000 or 10,000 of copies. Today, we have high-speed inkjet machines, machines that can print at surprisingly high speed, so up to 2.5 meters per second, so faster than you can walk. And then it's impressive how fast this paper then comes out of the machine. These machines are quite expensive, but they provide for high profitability if you're able to use the speed. If you're unable to use the speed, you have a problem, because then the expensive printing machine needs to wait for data. So really we have a data-driven process here, and it's important to get the data to the machine in printing machine speed. Yeah? And that means if your input data is coming in as a PDF file, that you need to be able to process the PDF file in print machine speed. Yeah? So no, the printer head isn't able to translate the information in the PDF file into ink that is being put on the paper. You need first to create a kind of an image out of the PDF file where a pixel just is a combination of color, and then that combination of color is being put onto the paper, or whatever substrate you have. So in my examples you have seen it's not necessarily paper. So if we now do some calculations, yeah, so let's assume we have a job, we have a printing machine. To make it easier for us, we don't calculate meter per second. We just say this printing machine gives us 3 pages per second, which means 180 pages per minute, and we want to print 360 copies. So I try to make it simple here. If we have a static job and we just print 1 page 360 times, we would have 2 minutes. in total, and we would have 2 minutes to prepare the next page. Yeah? So let's assume we have 4 pages, then while page 1 is being printed, we have 2 minutes to prepare page 2, which is easy. If it's now variable, we just print 1 page, and then we ought to provide the next page to the printing machine, which only gives us 1/3 of a second. And for instance, the travel agency thing that we've seen, it's impossible to convert that into an image of the whole thing in just 1/3 of a second. So if you really have designed products, and the industry wants to have designed products, even invoices are designed these days, you're kind of lost at the moment. Yeah? And that brings us to a point where we say, okay, but we can't do that. We can't do that, or we need to have highly advanced computer systems that would be able to do so. There is a solution to the whole thing, and that is basically caching. Yeah? So if you look at the examples that I've shown you, all of them are based on a template. So they share the same structure, they share part of the information, and only part of it is individual. Yeah? Individual are maybe texts, are barcodes, or in our example, even an image from the travel agency. But there are also parts that are repeating. Yeah? And a smart engine that we need for our printing machine would recognize which parts are static, would then put them into the cache, just remember them, and would for each page only process that part of the page that is individual, so that needs to be recalculated. And that is the only way to get designed PDF data to the printing machine in print machine speed. Yeah, and that means a PDF file, and that brings us to the PDF structure. A PDF file that is construed internally, that it is difficult to differentiate between static content and variable content, creates a problem. Yeah? So it would just print slowly. Yeah? But if you have a nicely designed PDF file where that is clear, then it can print at print machine speed. So it's important to look into the internal PDF structure here. Here's an example, just to make this more clear. We have our leaflet here, just the front matter. On the left-hand side is just the static content. Something, printing machine, the DFE is the term for it, the digital front end of the printing machine, should be able to recognize what is static in this PDF file, put it into the cache, and then concentrate for each page on the variable part that you can see here on the right-hand side, which is, in this example, demanding. So probably it might take a little more than 1/3 of a second, but shouldn't be too long. Yeah? But it's important to differentiate for the DFE, to recognize what is static and what is dynamic. And then I wouldn't be here, it wouldn't be very interesting to say, okay, that's it, and then we are done. It is, PDF files can indeed create problems. So much of our research goes into the direction where we analyze customer files that can't print at print machine speed, and we try to come up with solutions in order to prepare PDF files for allowing for caching, basically. So let's have a very short look into the internal PDF structure. There is one thing that a PDF file can have, and that is an X object. Yeah, so you can have a page and a PDF file, and then you just draw content, but you can encapsulate content into an X object, which then means you can reference that X objects from several pages. And that is the thing you should do in order to encapsulate static content. Yeah? So if, in our example here, the things on the left-hand side could all be put, the static content could all be put and defined in an X object, and would then only be referenced on each of the pages, it would be fairly easy for the RIP to differentiate between variable content and static content. But we can also see here already that that might create problems because some of the, you probably can't see that, there is some white text on the variable side that is on top of the green background. So, and that always creates problems because there is some overlap. So it would be easier for the DFE to process the file if there wouldn't be any overlaps. But of course, I'll have that on a slide later on, of course, nothing that I say today or is in the best practice case should be misinterpreted as limiting the design. Yeah, of course, nobody would want to limit a designer to only using certain things or to not just be as creative as possible. I mean, in the end, everything is about business, and then that shouldn't be the case. It's more about what can be, how can a PDF file be constructed to work better and achieve the same design. Yeah, but anyway, we have X objects in a PDF file, and X objects are the nice thing because that is the only way, more or less the only way. There are a few more things, but let's concentrate on X objects because these are by far the most important ones. These are the things that allow the DFE to cache parts of the pages. And let me also say, DFEs come from various vendors, but what I say here, at least according to our research, is common. Yeah? So they have their own rules, and they are quite advanced about how to identify static objects, and then they are different. The one is better maybe for a particular PDF file and the other for another maybe, but the rules, or what I say today, applies basically to all of them. When it comes to caching and static X objects, there are two topics that I want to cover. And these are self-contained Form X objects and transparency and overprinting. Two things that are important when we are looking at X objects from a caching point of view. The one thing, self-contained Form X object, again, something from internal PDF structure. An X object doesn't have to be self-contained. An X object, in a PDF file, you have something like a graphic state where, for instance, you have information like a line width or a color maybe, or color space. So that is all in the graphic states. And you can invoke a Form X object from context. So you could establish a line width of, let's say, 1 point, then call a Form X object. Form X object would draw a line, and then you switch the graphics content, set the line width to, let's say, 5 point, and then you call the same Form X object again, but then it will draw the line with 5 point. Yeah? So, and that, of course, means you can't cache it. Yeah? So a RIP, a DFE, would have to find out whether that X object is self-contained, whether anything that is drawn within the Form X object is also either specified in the Form X object itself, which would make it easy, or whether it's always the same. And unfortunately, the latter one is the more common case. So you would have to analyze the whole PDF file, whether a particular Form X object is always invoked with the same graphic state. Yeah, and that makes it complicated. And even more complicated is a Form X object can share resources. So you have a Form X object, and there are resources like a font or a color space that can be defined in the Form X object, but it doesn't have to. If it's on a page, it can inherit the resources from the page. And that also would be a problem, and that would also mean it can't be cached. So common thing here, result is only self-contained Form X object can be cached. And the DFE as assigned with a task to find out whether a form X object is self-contained or not. Yeah? And that is not straightforward. That is, in many cases at least, not straightforward. And that brings me first of the time to standards. So ideally, maybe, well, probably, ideally each form X object would say, I'm self-contained in this, so you can trust me, you can put me into the cache, I'm self-contained. Whenever I am used, I'm used in the same graphic states and I have my resources dictionary with me. It's easy to find out whether there is a resource dictionary, so that is not the issue. But whether the graphic state would change, that would require to analyze the whole PDF file. PDFVT, a subset standard that is based on PDFX for that reason, and that is just the main thing in PDFVT. VT stands for variable and transactional printing. The main thing here is it comes with metadata. So it allows a form X object to have some metadata saying I'm encapsulated, so I carry all information that I need to draw something inside. So everything's, I'm fully encapsulated. And the other thing, it can say, I am reused. Yeah, me, the form X object, X1, is reused in every record in my PDF file. So in our example, in every brochure that is being sent out. So that would be the ideal world. And even more, there's even more metadata. You can have depart structure where the PDF file would inform you where there are delimiters between records. So then it would say here the next record stays. So that would also make it easier for the DFE to find out what can be put into the cache. Yeah? And bottom line here is, unfortunately, you have PDF files, PDFVT files maybe even, but of course, this metadata is optional in there, so it's not necessarily there, and unfortunately, most of the time, it just isn't there. So that would be really nice, and that is something that our engine would do, add that metadata. But forget that. Anyway, so the other thing is, and I mean, this is far more complex, but we can keep it very short here. I told you there is problems when things overlap, static and variable content. You may still get away with it, with caching, but you can't do that if there is overprinting involved. So if a black text would overprint some static background, then meaning overprint means there is some interaction between the foreground object and the background object, or if there is transparency. I mean, for transparency, it's even more obvious because if you have a shadow and that is behind some text, and then, of course, the text is the addressee of our brochure, then, of course, the shadow has always a different shape, and then you can't cache the background, because the background will have to be calculated with the shadow in order to specify the result color. Yeah? So when you have transparency or overprint, and designers like these two things and frequently use them, then you better stay away from putting a transparent variable text or variable object in front of a static background. So static, the rule is static and variable background shouldn't interact by means of transparency or overprinting. So that brings us to kind of a summary of this analysis of the internal PDF structure and our needs in order to feed our expensive inkjet printer at print machine speed. It should be easy for our DFE, for the digital front end, to determine whether a given object is static, is reused, or whether it's variable and unique to the PDF file. Interactions if you're a designer and can possibly do so, you should avoid interactions by means of overprint or transparency. Ideally, variable content would be placed. That is really in your design tool, in whatever tool you use to design a page. You should indeed first place the static object and afterwards the variable object, because that may or will probably have an impact on the PDF output that you would create. PDF VT metadata is desirable, but usually design tools wouldn't allow you to add that, so that would have to be added later on. And then, to be clear one more time, of course, don't do any compromises on design. So do your design as creative and nice as possible. And that brings us to the last part of my session with some concrete suggestions for creating variable data print files that have just last week been published. There are 2 editions of the thing, one for developers, for vendors like us, or maybe developers of design tools, or designer tools, and one for designers who work with these tools. I want to give proper credits here to someone who was essential in creating these brochures, which is Martin Bailey, working for Global Graphics or Hybrid Software. Just that you know, it was not all invented by myself. And that is maybe a recap. So I now really want into what is in these best practice guides and see whether we maybe better understand the suggestions over there. And these 2 we can definitely better understand now. So draw static content before variable elements, I've said that, and minimize object overlaps between static and variable content, at least when it comes to transparency and overprint. And then maybe a more obvious rule, don't hide any objects. Yeah? So this is one of the suggestions here. It's actually not a rare case that a designer starts with some drawing and then says, okay, it's actually not so nice, I do something different, and instead of removing it, they keep it in the file and just cover it by something else. And then the DFE would have to first process the hidden content only to then cover it with something else. This is not a rare thing. One of my most problematic files was, you probably know, or you maybe know what a printer mark is, an indication of where the sheet should be cutted after printing, so just a line outside of the print space. And the designer, or whatever, who created the PDF file, put some lines on each of the pages of these cut lines, which is good to do, and then covered them with 2 more lines, yeah? Covered them with 2 more lines because they throw away the first, so they tried, yeah. But the problem was the 2 lines in the forefront were a little smaller than the ones in the background. And then the foreground thing was using transparency, which meant it was impossible to cache, and that file processed 30 seconds per page. Yeah? So it was a complete disaster just because the design was not the issue. The way it was created, that was the issue. And I mean, hiding away would have been better. The problem here was it was not even hidden. It was still visible. Anyway. And more suggestions here for images. We briefly go over them so that you get some impression of what is in these guides. We heard inline images, so you can have an image as a Form X object, external, or you can have an inline image in the page content stream. Yeah, and then, of course, if you have it in the page content stream, and you would use the same image again, you would have to define it again. And then, of course, it can't be cached. So it would be better to have an image always in a Form X object so that it can be referenced on the next page again. Then in outdated engines, sometimes images are striped, so tiled. That was done in times when the printer didn't have enough memory. Trust me, modern high-speed ink devices have enough memory, so you wouldn't use that. And then what I find demanding suggestion is sometimes we have personalized images, and then the suggestion is to divide these images into two parts so that one part of the image has the static part, and the variable part, which in this case would be MS Dietrich, is the variable part. That would really, printers would love you if you do so, but of course it's either you have a very intelligent workflow beforehand, or you have a giving designer. Yeah, that is basically the same. Don't hide stuff away. Quite often you have an image and then you clip it to a visible area, but that still means the DFE would have to process the whole image. So it would be better to clip that away. And of course, workflows exist that allow you to do later on. So you see, a workflow can have a look at the PDF file, can see, okay, there are clipped areas on that image, and then remove that. Vector, yeah, fonts is also a big issue. We had a talk on that by Patrick in the other room. Fonts can be subsetted so that they only contain glyphs that are used on that very page. But that means, and fonts also are to be processed, and it would be nice for a DFE to process a font only once and put it into the cache. But that can only be done if the same font is used throughout the PDF file. If you would have subsets for each page of the same font, but with different glyphs, it can't be cached, which means it will take more time. And then quite obviously, if you have a graphic, not necessarily an image, if you have vector graphics, you shouldn't draw it anew every time you use it. You would rather group it together and place it again. And smooth shades are always an issue. For transparency, I don't want to go too much into detail here. Yeah. In general, we could, I already said, so don't use transparency for interactions between static and variable content. Other way to approach it would be to say, don't use transparency for variable content, only use it for static content. Yeah, and then another suggestion in the guide is, and we already heard that, use PDF standards. There is one more for the ones of you who are interested in graphic arts processing steps that is coming from the packaging industry, and that allows you to standardize the way how processing steps that are not the print process, the print step itself, how information for these processing steps can be encoded in a PDF file, for instance, a die line or folding mark, and so forth. Yeah. Let me close with two remarks. This file actually is not ideal. I'm not sure whether you can see that, but the text in front of the image actually uses transparency. So the text has some shadow, and that is actually, from a DFE point of view, not a very nice file. But anyway. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is we are quite active at PDF Association for this industry in the print product metadata, LWG. So if you're interested in standardizing how data is being exchanged for variable data printing, a fast-growing area. We are open to more attendees.